Welcome back to American Arms Channel, ladies and gentlemen. This is Drake, and today we're taking a detailed look at how to disassemble your Benelli Vinci or Super Vinci trigger group. Now, I've started here with the lower receiver module, and if you don't know how to get to this point, I suggest you check out the videos on how to disassemble your Benelli. But I wanted to start right here because it is a little bit different than your run-of-the-mill shotgun or your run-of-the-mill Benelli with a classic rat tail design where the action spring and plunger are housed within the stock and not simply a spring and guide rod inside the tubular receiver. So this is your lower receiver module. There are very few components to this actual module, but what we'll be taking a look at today is how to pull out our trigger group as well as disassemble it, as well as how to pull out our shell stop and bolt release. So to get started, you will want to have your handy dandy punch, a nice pair of needle nose pliers, and depending upon how detailed you want to get, a hammer or a rubber mallet is also recommended. So to start, simply from any which way you prefer, take your punch and push through. You shouldn't need to hit it with a mallet, but if it's brand new, it might be a little tight. Pull it through, should be fairly familiar. It's fairly standard, looks identical to most all of the cross pins that hold in the trigger groups with Benellis. Now, make sure you depress your cartridge stop and bolt release. And you'll want to come inside the trigger guard here and press up on the center of the housing. Again, I'll do that again. Take a look here. You want to just press right there and it will rock up, grab its tail, pull up, and rock out. And there is your trigger group. To remove, I'll set this to the side, to remove your shell stop and bolt release, I find it is easiest to reach inside, depress the spring, pull out your pin. Again, I'll do that again. It's very simple, very easy. Pull out your retention pin. Your spring will fall out the bottom now. Set that aside. And now you can wiggle loose your cartridge stop and bolt release. If for some reason it is very, very dirty, or you have a broken spring or need to replace this bolt release and shell release, you can simply punch out this small retention pin here from either direction and remove it. However, that is completely unnecessary for most standard maintenance. And really the only reason you pull this out is because there is some grime from the entire season or multiple seasons stuck behind here that you'd like to clean out. And you want to get to the recesses here in the polymer lower receiver module. All right, so we're going to set those parts to the side. Now this looks fairly familiar, but not completely familiar. So you're going to notice a couple differences between this and all of your other Benelli pattern trigger groups and shell lifter groups. So this is going to automatically kick in the shell release tab whenever I lift the lifter up. It's not terribly important, but it is a functional difference where that does not happen on something like, say, the Super Black Eagle series. You do have a single D-clip, and although this does look like a cross bolt pin, this is not. It's simply an indexing tab for the bolt guide rails to ride on. Just like with the Super Black Eagle, to start disassembly, we are going to disengage our safety. We are going to hold our hammer, and it's easiest, I find, to hold the lifter, put your thumb on the hammer itself gently, and then pull straight back on your trigger. And it will ease forward. You'll notice that the trigger does not have a lot of tension. This is because the majority of your tension is going to come from this rat tail back here, this post being compressed while it is sitting flush against the buttstock while you have the gun completely assembled. This also provides tension to the receiver and keeps this in a forward position and in place. I will make a side note that replacing this hammer spring and retention spring for the lower receiver module is actually the same diameter spring. It is the same for all intents and purposes as any other Benelli. But long story short, you can replace that with a standard spring. You don't have to worry about not being able to replace it with anything that you can find commonly, or not being able to enhance the performance of it. But that is an aside. So to get started, I like to take my little needle nose pliers here, and I will pry up on the D-clip, putting my thumb on it, and be careful not to snap it, of course. This likes to collect a little bit of grime. Very, very important part. Don't lose it, set it apart, aside. Like the Super Black Eagle, if you do lose that D-clip, it's not a huge deal. The lower receiver module will prevent the retention from slipping side to side, but you do want to keep that in there because it especially keeps on your left hand bolt rail. So, and you'll realize which handing it is, because if you look at the top, there will be a concave cut inwards. So don't assemble them backwards. You want each side going in towards the center of the trigger group. Now we can begin disassembly by simply pressing on that. We can pull out our cross bolt pin here, typically with just hand pressure. And one thing that we can do at this point to make our lives easier is the post and spring for the articulating arm that interacts with the bolt for the shell lifter. We can pull that back, up and out just as easy as that. Keep those together. There's no need to take those apart typically. So now we've lost all of our tension on that. That's going to make things a bit easier. And we can start to wiggle. Now, if yours is a little stiff, your small punch is not going to do anything. It could help just like that, push a little bit farther, but you may want to choose to grab a slightly larger punch. Get a little bit farther out, and we can start to wiggle it free until the hammer, and what's this? The entire trigger module comes out. Once you have this component removed, you're going to want to make sure that you keep this together. Now, this tab right here is an indexing tab, as well as a way to keep this small rat tail configuration together. Now, there is two posts that are integral part of the hammer, and this whole thing is held together. You don't have to disassemble this any farther. You can typically just wipe it down as is. However, if you do wish to disassemble it, it's all friction fit, or if it does fall apart on you, just know, nothing to panic about. Note the indexing of the tab. Remove it off the back. Your dog leg is going to be on your right hand of the tail. You pull it off the right hand side, pull it off the left hand side, and there's your chrome plated hammer. Not very difficult at all. And at this point, we can see that we can access our spring. Now, this spring is actually a Wolf plus 25% spring for Benelli Super 90 models. It is longer and it is a little bit more finicky to get in and out of this recess than anything else. You will see some people disassemble this stop right here, this plunger, this rat tail coming off the back of the trigger housing. That is unnecessary. You can pretty much clean that as is. No need to wear out the polymer or the roll pin that retains it. Pretty much only if you need to replace that component should you remove it. Now at this point, we can complete removing our cross pin, and we've also got our other bolt rail that we will set to our side. Now we can lift upwards and down and kind of rock out our lifter. And as you can see, we are quite filthy. It has been quite a time since this has been cleaned. So you can keep this together as well, but do remember that just like any other Benelli, or in fact, many semi-automatic designs, you do have a friction fit simple piece here that interacts with the articulating arm and provides that joint. You can simply shake it out. If it won't go, you can push it with a pin. It'll just fall apart on you like that. Now you've got your components apart. And that right there is pretty much as far as you will need to go. Now, if you do wish to remove it, disassemble it any farther, you can start punching pins if you'd like. The only problem is there's still a little bit of spring tension here with the trigger, and there is a spring to contend with here with the bolt release lock and cartridge release here on the bottom of the trigger housing. Do be mindful though, mine example is like this, but yours may differ. This pin can be a little bit loose. I suggest just making sure they're flush. Again, there's no real need to remove this component unless you are repairing or replacing a spring or a component. This is really as far as you need to go. You can access everything from here. All of your major bits are out of the trigger housing. So if we line everything back up, we can see that there are a few more pieces to remove out of the Vinci than out of the standard Super 90 series. However, the overall design of the firearm is much less complicated than others. All right, so to begin reassembly, we're going to want to start with our lifter. Yeah, let's get the arm back in, get our pin, and make sure that you are assembling from the correct side. You'll see a concave portion on the interior of that arm, and we'll get it together right there. We'll set that aside for just a moment, because the next thing we'll do that'll make life easy is we will reassemble our hammer tail. So what you want to do is take these two pieces, and I've already done it backwards, so you can see it's kind of it can be a little challenging. You want to make sure that the two dog leg pieces come together, and that this particular dog leg on the right hand arm is going down and out. So you will index each one of those arms on the corresponding pegs. And again, this is where three hands and not trying to film this comes in quite handy. And then we will reassemble just like that. So remember that this scoop faces downwards on this retention bracket, and that this post goes inwards towards the center of this assembly. And our hammer assembly is back together. So we'll set that down gently so it doesn't pop apart. Next, let's make sure we put our spring on our lifter post. This is going to provide tension for the lifter as well as help guide it. Make sure that you have not lost your washer, which retains in this. Unlike Black Eagle 3, this is a little bit tighter, doesn't need to be pulled out typically. To make sure it's retained, it will stay in there just fine. We'll then take our right hand bolt guide, and we can tell because this has a little bit more shaving on the right hand side, whereas the left hand side is concave just a touch more on the left-hand side. So we're going to take this guy, and with and I like to call this the rabbit, because if you look at it, it looks like a rabbit with little floppy ears. Here's his nose, there's his big old eyes, and there's his floppy ears. So we're going to take that. We are going to take our cross pin, and not through the top, but the lower hole, put it straight through. So now that we've got some sub-assemblies together, we are going to take our lifter, and we are going to fiddle it right in. You're going to come up from the bottom, see how it is open, and we're going to come up from this angle. Kind of hard to show this to you. Sometimes it is easier to tip it this way, because remember, this post is only held in by friction and gravity, so sometimes it is more efficient to do it that way. And you're going to kind of want to come up and you wiggle over. So what I'm overcoming here is this ledge, and I'm getting up underneath it and seating. Now I can take my post with my bolt guide, and I can start to insert it. I will put it in through the lifter, find the hole, and now we are completely aligned. You can push this in, but right now, because it's retained, you can just let it flop around, not worry about it. There is enough tension, at least there should be, on your axis pin that you don't have to worry about it falling out. You can back it out just slightly, and we'll set this assembly down for just a moment. We're now going to want to take our spring, and we are going to want to insert it into this plunger cup. I find it is easiest to push the plunger cup all the way up so that we can see it. Insert the spring. It's bidirectional. It does not matter. It's the same on each end. And pull it back, and voila, we are magically all in line. No fiddling necessary. Now, here comes the little bit of a tricky part, because you're working again with a bunch of pieces that are held together by friction until they're completely assembled. So don't worry about your hammer as far as the orientation at the moment. What I do is I'm going to pinch together, and keeping it up or forward is best, but again, you don't really need to be worried too much about the orientation. I'm going to slip this down in, and I'm going to be mindful, and see if I can give you a shot here. We're going to make sure that retention bracket's going past the sear engagement. So your semi-automatic sear, the part that grabs onto the rearward hook, is going to be the rearmost engagement. Your front one's going to be the one that actually releases the hammer. You're going to want to get past that. Then you're going to want to push down. And at this point, we can turn our hammer vertically, and we can ride it down. Now, if our post is too far in, we can't push it any farther, so let's wiggle it out just a little bit. Now we can push back, and this is where you'll want to come in from this side. It's hard for me to show you on camera, but I am aligning everything, and together it goes. Now, the next point that you're going to want to assemble is you're going to take your spring and post guide for the lifter, insert it, make sure the fat end is going towards the articulating arm, insert it into the O-ring, and all you have to do is ride it up and push back at the same time, kind of up, back, down, and in. And if you can pull back and get full tension and see that it's functioning, you are 100% good to go. Now, since we've gone too far, we have not yet aligned our bolt guides. So we're going to push that back through just a little bit, just enough so that we can get this wiggled out. And I still am not quite far enough back, so I'm going to take my punch, and I'm just going to give that a little bit of a push, just like we were going to disassemble it. I'm going to pull it back and right over the guide. Now I can finish seating it. And if you run into some problems, don't try and smack it with a mallet. Pull it down a little bit until it lines up, and then push it through. And again, this is just going to be something that's going to take a little bit of patience, because you've got to get everything lined up. Now we're almost completely back together. So we're going to take and drop our left-hand bolt guide on, and then the only thing that retains this, once again, is going to be, if I can pick it up off the table, your little tiny D-clip. Now, because you've been pushing this through in all sorts of manners, the best thing to do is just find out where your flats are. So my flats are right here on the bottom. I'm going to line up the flat side of the D-ring. And I find the best thing to do is to take your punch, or better yet, take your needle nose pliers, get the flat side settled into its notch, hold it with your thumb, and then take your pliers and use those to just pull it around. And you'll want to make sure it's on. Just press at it and pull on this guide, and it will let you know whether or not you have it secured. There will be a little bit of float between the two. Don't worry about it. That will all align when it drops back into the lower receiver module. All right, so now we're going to put our shell stop and bolt release back into the lower receiver module before we reassemble the module with the trigger group. So we will take this piece, and I find it is easiest to drop it in and push it out and then hold it with your finger. Take this spring, put it in there, hold it with your finger, press down. Now there is a star pattern on the interior of this that you're going to kind of align, and you just want to kind of get that close. Compress it. You will get your holes to line up. Take your retention and access pin here, and it should drop down no problem. Let it go, and if you need to adjust it, simply take your pliers, grab it in here, and give it a little bit of a wiggle until it's perfectly lined up with where it needs to be. This is typically the easiest way instead of trying to fiddle around with it and make it go where it needs to be. But when you actuate it, you should still get some good tension. There's really no way to mess that up. The next thing you're going to do, take your recently reassembled trigger group, push it down and in, and it's going to kind of rock and lock in, and we can see here this is not seated. You're going to want to get down past, just like that. You're going to come down at a steep angle after getting your shell lifter in there. Steep angle. You're going to want this lip underneath this bridge, and now it will simply rock into place. Turn it on its side. You should be able to see daylight through the pinhole. Take your pin, insert, and it should go in nice and easy. You can recock your hammer. Make sure you take your safety off. Now we can give it a little function test here. And it's all good to go. And again, don't worry about it not having a lot of hammer spring tension, because this plunger will compress when you assemble the lower onto the upper and buttstock module, the upper receiver and buttstock module, and it will build tension. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was informative for you and useful. As always, please like, comment, subscribe, and ring that notification bell to stay up to date on everything that's happening here on American Arms Channel. Also, if you're wondering where American Arms Channel goes in the near future, should it ever get the axe by the tyrannical YouTube analytics, make sure you check out and subscribe to the channels on Bitchute and UGEtube. UGEtube is Utah Gun Exchange's 2011-12 style YouTube video platform that is a hosting site for all manner of things. It's not super popular at the moment, but it's a great place to stay backed up with all your favorite channels, including American Arms Channel. So please go over there, check that out. You'll find everything duplicated automatically on Bitchute. There's a bit of a backlog on UGEtube, so give that a look. And as always, guys, God bless. Keep your powder dry. I'll see you in the next video.